Now, if you've watched this series thus far, you might have caught on that I've made a lot of comparisons to the Wednesday Netflix show in regards to certain plot beats and contrivances. This isn't done arbitrarily just because Wednesday is still fresh on my tongue like herpes-riddled Tums, but because I notice a conspicuous number of similarities between it and Hazbin Hotel that go far beyond just the two of them being a 8-episode season. For example, between episode 4 and 5 of Wednesday, there was a noticeable time jump between what happened at the end of episode 4 to 5, which was done as a way to accelerate certain plot beats for minor characters and nothing more. And wouldn't you know it, Hazbin Hotel does the same, and even more egregiously than Wednesday did. If you remember from episode 1, Adam gave Charlie a 6-month window to figure out her social experiment before the next purge, and in episode 5, we start with Charlie bloodshot and panicking that she now only has a few months before the next purge. So yes, somehow in the span of just 3 episodes, we've managed to skip a whole season's, ironic, worth of potential character development or even establishing the issues with Hazbin Hotel as a means to redeem sinners, all done to accelerate the tension of the next purge, which makes the arbitrarily expediting of it more contrived, as you could just as easily have an 8 to 10 month jump and still have the same circumstances apply, but that would still require some amount of building up our characters if the show even got a proper season treatment, rather than feeling like a mere appetizer stretched thin into a 3-course meal. So, because things are looking a bit dire, Faggy suggests the unthinkable, asking Charlie's dad for help. The only reason that Charlie seems to oppose this is that her dad was the one who allowed these purges to happen to begin with, which is quite contrary to the literal monologue she was reading in episode 1, where Heaven decided of their own volition to do so because of Lilith's growing influence over Hell. Unless Charlie means that Lucifer allowed these to go on unabated as a result of his losing faith in his dream, this doesn't coincide. In fact, Charlie displays almost bipolar tendencies as she quickly changes her tune on asking her father for help on the basis that he could get her set up with a meeting to go to heaven. At least in this case, not with Adam helming said meeting, I assume. Also, because as though the show didn't already spotlight it enough thus far, Husk asks Charlie if she has daddy issues on her reticence to call him. Yep. It was not funny the last 4 times you did it, and it's still not funny the 5th time. I'm sure you'll have me want to get a vasectomy for my eardrums if you do it a 6th time. Charlie opines on what Husk said by mentioning that her parents split over something we won't know yet, but if I'm being honest, I don't know if the show ever explains what caused them to split other than the implication that Lilith's ideals of empowering Hell went against Lucifer's ideals. But regardless, because of this, Lucifer became distant to Charlie, and by fucking god it would be so on brand with this show, what with the daddy issue illusions and the title of this goddamn episode, to also make Lucifer out to be some deadbeat, because apparently that's all that Vivian knows how to write. As for the man himself, we are finally introduced to him, preoccupied with making rubber ducks. Yeah. What with the fact that he makes these almost as a distraction to what else is going around and is almost confused by his daughter calling him, did the show give Lucifer autism? He even has socially awkward tendencies that I've had with talking to people I don't know too well in the context of him calling his daughter, as though he hasn't worked out this whole being a father thing. I don't know if that's what they're trying to characterize him as, but hey, I suppose this show did indeed subvert my expectations by him not being a deadbeat. The conversation between Lucifer and Charlie is extremely awkward, mainly that Lucifer has been so absent-minded about what else is going on around him that even things like knowing about Charlie's Hotel or their advertisements are unknown to him. So, taken from that, I am to believe that Lucifer was likely so dismayed by his exile that he distracted himself with a single-minded goal of making rubber ducks to do the rest of everything else. And hey, this is some really great subtext that isn't just told verbatim, unlike the constant daddy issues parable thrown recklessly thus far. Charlie wants Lucifer to give her a meeting to heaven to assess the viability of her hotel, which is the only thing Lucifer confidently stamps down against. Charlie pleads that she doesn't ask many favors from him, and that if he's doubtful, that he should see the hotel for himself to judge its viability. Lucifer seems elated by that prospect, pointing to his depression as the reason he wants to go, which makes whatever subtext I just praised a moment ago futile. You really just know how to ruin a good thing, don't ya, Hazbin Hotel? Because Lucifer is arriving in an hour, Charlie and Vaggie spur the other hotel staff in making the hotel presentable for when he arrives. I should also make it a point that when Lucifer arrives, the show writers make it apparent that while he's top dog, he's sorely lacking in height, although given that someone small like Charlie's around 6 foot tall apparently isn't really saying much about him. Also of note is that Alistair, while present, has some subtleties in his expression that seem to imply unpleasantness with Lucifer coming over, which is meant to foreshadow a rivalry these two have that will come completely out of left field for me and everybody watching it. Anyhow, Lucifer isn't exactly sure how to take his surroundings, trying to be polite in a similar veneer to Charlie before taking abhorrence at Alistair's bar setup, prompting Alistair to respond and retort, making his own sly comment about Lucifer's height. Lucifer doesn't seem aware nor remotely intimidated by Alistair or his antics from yore, giving him the moniker of has been, as per the name of the hotel, before Alistair gets his first swear out in response. Quite funny because of how normally mild-mannered and in control Alistair is in most situations. Charlie tries to squash the beef between the two by selling other amenities of the hotel while also being grateful of Alistair's contributions to it. Alistair takes advantage of her gratefulness by grating on Lucifer's jealousy, getting Lucifer to quickly change the subject to meet her other friends. She first introduces Lucifer to Vaggie, getting a bit of a reaction by Lucifer, shocked that she'd be into girls. Which, I don't know if the show is trying to imply Lucifer is homophobic, or that he genuinely was surprised. Frankly, I'm 50-50 on that being the case given the heavy-handedness of him possibly being a deadbeat. Might as well make him bigoted too! The other interactions between the hotel staff are one note and is cut short by a chandelier inexplicably falling behind him, which also inexplicably starts the first musical, I guess because Lucifer sees that he needs to help Charlie because of his setback. Frankly, the pacing of episode 5 is by far the worst that I've seen in this show thus far. Don't even get me started on episode 6, with how it needs to quickly establish things with no fanfare to go on. So what about Hell's Greatest Dad? Well, as I said earlier, it very suddenly and awkwardly tries to establish that Alistair has now attached himself as a surrogate father figure to Charlie, seemingly between the months of trying and failing to get this hotel going. Yeah, where in the other living fuck was that or even implied as such between the last 4 episodes? Honestly, it seems Alistair for the entirety of the show up to this point didn't even care if it succeeded or failed and just contributed to it out of his own amusement. Something that he even expressed in the pilot, which remember, still canon by the show's standards. Granted, for all I know, Alistair is just poisoning himself as Charlie's father to get under Lucifer's skin, or that Alistair needs to do this to set up his not-so-disguised and possible arrangement with Lilith that we'll get into later in this episode, but it's extremely hard to read the true intentions of Alistair. In fact, while I was looking up other information secondhand about the show, I found a blurb where Vivian clarified in a Q&A that Alistair only acted like a father figure to Charlie to set up a rivalry between Lucifer. Glad to know that I have to find this ancillary information just so I don't think Alistair has ulterior motives to do this, only to find out that Alistair is actually just extremely petty behind the awe of mystery that is his smirk. As for the song itself, it has all the same pitfalls of musicals that I don't like about them, but there's an extra layer of self-insistence this song puts upon itself, whether that's the rivalry duet that Alistair and Lucifer share, the baffle them with bullshit vomit of colors, sounds, and visuals, even if some are on par with Lucifer as a deitic being, and most annoyingly, how the character Mimsy slots herself into the story. Like, how did Mimsy know exactly when to arrive at the hotel for such a circumstance to sing along to whatever these two characters she likely doesn't know were singing to, or assume that anyone would know who she is? As I said, it almost feels as though there was no excuse for this to be a musical because of the manner in which the dialogue and plot beats are delivered, because whether by Vivienne's hand or Amazon's, 2 musicals must be had, no more, no less. Mimsy, like with Zestial and Carmine, was also a JPEG image cameo in the pilot who once again gets upgraded to no more than B-plot filler for episode 5, as her intentions for coming here are not exactly genuine. Of course, no one knows who she is save for Alistair, who, as apparently the two have some history together when they were mortals, and given Mimsy's Flapper Girl setup, means Alistair likely was alive during the Roaring 20s. The 1920s for you Zoomers out there. I guess this is a small aside for world building, but wouldn't it be a conundrum for sinners to be able to recall their past lives in such a way as to plan revenge on those in the mortal plane, a la the immediate murder professionals? Furthermore, how does heaven exactly account for Hellborn coming into contact or even meddling with affairs on Earth in such a way as to lead them into becoming sinners themselves? Shouldn't there be something like in the Supernatural show where angels poison themselves as normal humans to flush out any demonic affluence on Earth so that normal people don't succumb to dark temptations? Anyhow, Charlie and Lucifer don't have the time to give pleasantries to Mimsy as they were already preoccupied with showing around the hotel, which establishes the B-plot as to Mimsy's intentions of coming here now of all things. Husk is obviously not pleased with Mimsy being here for reasons we can get into, and Angel Dust is surprised that Alistair even had friends of note, prompting Mimsy to exposit on Alistair's backstory in a way similar to when Vaggie described Alistair to him. Yeah, about the pilot apparently being canon, well, considering that Angel already got what Alistair's deal was to Vaggie, why would he need to ask Mimsy essentially the same thing? And the only additional bit of info we get about Alistair is the manner in which he traps his victims through a radio frequency as opposed to the pilot. If Sir Pentious asked Mimsy what Alistair's deal was, this would be more justified, even in the context of Mimsy saying all this while both Pentious and Angel are hearing all this, but here, I guess they forgot they made the pilot canon. Mimsy asks for another drink, but finds that Husk has left his duties to chase after Alistair to have some words with him, mainly to do with Mimsy. Husk doesn't approve of Mimsy being here, as she has a tendency to bring trouble along with her to have her friends bail her out of it. This derails slightly into a tangent about questioning Alistair's absence in relation to his power, getting Husk upset to the point that he lashes out, which in turn forces Alistair's hand.
Big talk for someone who's also on a leash.
What did you say?
Nothing,
If you ever say that again, I will tear your soul apart and broadcast your screams for every other disrespectful wretch who dares to question me.
Understood?
Lovely.
So, several things to talk about in regards to this scene. Remember how I said in episode 4 how the naysayers would get their comeuppance in regards to how this show treats the nature of abuse? Well, they get it again here, because up to this point the show has been very loosey-goosey on Alistair's morals that I almost suspect the show writers forgot that he had Husk, and possibly to the same extent Nifty, contractually obligated to do his bidding up until Husk said something that would upset Alistair to some degree. You can't imagine how polarizing the feelings are about Alistair in relation to Valentino, in spite of the fact both of them have enslaved people to their will. It doesn't matter if Alistair is more polite about it. A house Negro by any other name is still a slave to the plantation owners, even if they get it easier than the ones picking the cotton. Secondly, as has been alluded to in episode 1 and 2 chiefly, Husk again implies Alistair's likely deals with Lilith, as it can't just be a coincidence that the two of them have been absent from Hell for the same amount of time. But if that is the case, and Husk knows about this, wouldn't that be something Husk would want to impart to Charlie, if for nothing else but a chance of being free from Alistair's chains? Or that Charlie would want to know if Alistair's intentions to helping the hotel aren't just purely out of amusement, but by Lilith's hand. If that even is why Alistair went here to begin with? Again, we can't really know for certain if that is the case, but at the very least, it would behoove Husk to let Charlie know that Alistair's reasons for going here are not entirely his own, wouldn't it? Back to the A-plot, Charlie finalizes the tour with her dad, who seems to either be absent-minded on what she's trying to propose to him, or trying to avoid discussing anything regarding redeeming sinners in hell. Lucifer swallows his pride, ironic, and says that while he's grateful that Charlie wants to redeem sinners, that he doesn't see them as capable of redemption, echoing a harsh sentiment that Adam cartoonishly said during episode 1. Although in contrast to Adam, the reason Lucifer believes this is that his opinions about heaven are low while their standards are abnormally high. Oh, we'll have words about that, won't we? Something that the sinners wouldn't be able to acclimate towards. The bickering continues between Charlie and Lucifer, the former wanting to give it her best shot, while the latter states that Charlie shouldn't risk her neck out for those who don't want to be saved to begin with, until the Sour B plot rears its head with some loan sharks wanting Mimsy to pay her dues. The sharks lay siege on the hotel, something I'm surprised they were even able to do without Lucifer board wiping the shit out of them before they could say pride. But alas, Lucifer uses this as a way to prove his point about sinners taking a mile for every inch Charlie gives. So, who else to save them but Alistair, who, like with Serpentius, handedly deals with the lone sharks. Lucifer again tries to use this as a sticking point, but Charlie counters that Alistair is trying to defend the hotel, and in a way, the idea the hotel represents. Disappointed that her own father can't even believe in her dreams. I know this is going to be a footnote for what the next musical entails, and possibly some semblance of a theme going for this show, but man, they really don't miss an opportunity to make every father figure between Hazbin Hotel and Helluva Boss unlikable in some regard. Alistair finishes his rampage while Mimsy tries to flagellate him on account of her bringing this trouble in the first place, but Alistair sees right through her, asking her to leave if she isn't genuinely interested in redemption. Again, where did Alistair suddenly get altruistic about the ideals of this hotel between episode 1 to now, huh? Am I just supposed to assume that in the 4-month gap between episode 4 and 5, which, bear in mind, was apparently wrapped with failure from Charlie, that he thinks this is worth a shot? Like, if Charlie was remotely and consistently successful, I could then see why Alistair would think this way, but by what we've seen, there should be no reason that Alistair thinks this way, even if he's just saying this more so because Mimsy had ill intentions to come to the hotel. So, with the B plot done, we can finish up on the A plot and get our government-mandated second musical going too. Charlie pleads her father help her, and exasperated, Lucifer bawls that heaven didn't listen to his dreams, and that he can't bring himself to see Charlie crush in a similar way to him. More than anything, cues up sort of neatly with their discussion, even if the manner in which this becomes a musical is as contrived as ever. Still, at least it's more reserved in the instrumental and visual department, coming off as this slow burn acoustic duet that does bear on wholesome with the relation these two share. The most revealing things about this instrumental is that Charlie, while young, was enchanted by Lucifer's dreams, visualized in this diorama of a swan with biblically accurate angel wings at the center of some sort of solar system. So as I said back in episode 1, it's a bit contradictory for Charlie to insist that she'll continue Lilith's dream, when ultimately her dreams were based on her father's dreams, whatever this image is supposed to symbolize. Second of note is that Lilith, faceless, took Charlie away from her father to do his thing, again making me speculate that Lilith's desires do not fall in line with Lucifer's, compounding the confusion of Charlie wanting to continue Lilith's dream if it's diametrically opposed to Lucifer's, the dream she ultimately wants. Additionally, because these two find commonality behind what they desire, they hope in that they can rekindle their relationship and not be apart again. But honestly, what was keeping them apart in the first place? It wasn't like Lucifer was scared to go to the hotel because of his depression. In fact, he was raring to go the moment Charlie gave him an invitation. Was it that he was unsure of what Charlie may think of him if he wasn't willing to go through with her plan? Because that doesn't coincide with Charlie wanting desperately to be in contact with him. The only rogue element in all of this is that Lilith must have forced this separation by the flashback Charlie gives, but for what reason we can only speculate by what I've already surmised. After the musical, Lucifer says that he can set Charlie up with a meeting to heaven, but that he won't be able to go with her once he does, likely on account of him being exiled in that pardon that he and Charlie inexplicably have regarding purges. Vaggie asks Charlie if she's ready, and she says yes, mainly because Vaggie will be there with her, getting an interesting reaction from her. And oh, won't we have a lot to say about that and all that comes with episode 6, won't we? But that was episode 5, and like clockwork, has all the same problems with that episode 1 has, and then some, reminding me again that episode 4 was merely lubing up my asshole before I get metaphorically sodomized by what this episode and episode 6 will bring me. And speaking of, let's get this next episode over with. I might as well get this out of the way before we delve into episode 6, as I've not made my feelings about it unknown prior to doing this analysis. Episode 6 is by far the worst episode in Hazbin Hotel. It is so bad, in fact, that it killed any hope that I would come away with this show being mostly middling from episode 1 going onward, and that me merely making a small rant video on it would not suffice my utter disdain of it top to bottom. I have noticed that with certain media of this quality that there is a point where it jumps the shark. Wednesday's episode 7 was that. The sequence where Moxie betrays Jack's crew in the pre-sequel was that. And a particular line in this episode, as well as everything surrounding it, will do that. So let's get to it, shall we? We start with Charlie and Vaggie preparing their trip to heaven. Charlie a bit anxious on account of it being her likely last chance to prove redemption a possibility. Vaggie again tries to squirm her way out of going to heaven with her, but can't stomach a good excuse and is charmed by Charlie's demeanor to go. Meanwhile, Angel Dust comes back from yet another exhausting day doing Valentino's dirty work, and oh, won't that be relevant for the tone deafness this episode in particular illustrates, before yet another random explosion assaults the hotel, keeping in tone with the running gag of that particular side of the hotel getting bombarded upon. This is a way to reintroduce Cherry Bomb to the picture, who came on account of Angel Dust's prior stress of the work day. Why in the hell didn't Cherry Bomb go through the front door or come by in the 5 fucking months Angel has been here is left a mystery to me, but again, meta-narrative reasons go beyond the character's own. The reasons for Cherry Bomb showing up at this time is fourfold, 2 of which we can get into later and the other 2 we can get into right now. As a way for Charlie to come up with the idea for Cherry and Angel to bring the hotel staff on vacation while Charlie and Vaggie go to heaven, and for Cherry Bomb to exacerbate Angel's inhibitions further. Why that will be relevant for this episode we shall see soon, but for now, why Charlie suddenly trusts Cherry Bomb to do this for them on nothing else but being Angel's friend, especially not knowing whether Cherry would do something uncouth to her interests of redemption, is yet again a contrivance this episode in particular allows for her future development in said episode, further poisoning Charlie as irresponsible and immature. So Charlie and Vaggie leave the hotel staff to their own devices, in both meanings of the word, as they catch a portal to heaven. Before we can get into that, Cherry Bomb's introduction also awkwardly starts a relationship with Sir Pentious, despite the 2 of them literally being at each other's neck for turf during the last purge. And I can only assume this was done as to appeal to the fans who crack-shipped them hard. Talk about audience capture, am I right? But seriously, where was the chemistry to even imply such a thing in the pilot? Although I suppose this show also decides that Angel Dust and Husk have a thing for each other too, simply based on Angel Dust's advances towards him, which, Vivienne, telling your audience that you can woo someone if you harass them long enough isn't exactly the lesson you should be telling us. Charlie and Vaggie walk up to them pearly gates with one St. Peter who tries to keep them entering in the first place. Okay, this isn't an adaptation issue, but more so with a real-life issue with the depiction of this St. Peter, as that isn't just a moniker but a name given to an actual person who existed at some point of history. And looking at what he likely looked like compared to here is a bit of a curious decision to me to have St. Peter not only deceptive, unusually zoomerish in appearance, but also noseless too. St. Peter is told to step aside by the introduction of the Seraphim, portrayed currently by one Emily and Sarah. And yes, I am not fucking joking with you, that is her literal name. It'd be like if I named a ring wraith in the Lord of the Rings, Eighth. Like, goddamn, at least come up with a name that didn't take you a microsecond to come up with. Regardless, the Seraphim, at least as I understand them, are of the highest tiers of heaven, second only to God. Except that because this show already established that there are no gods, that Seraphim in this universe would be the equivalent to gods. This is very important for what will be dropped on our laps like hot concrete shit to understand just how vile this show portrays heaven, as we will soon discover. Sarah is the older and more calm-natured of the two, Emily coming off as a surrogate daughter to Sarah and a counterpart to Charlie by her upbeat and bright nature. Unfortunately, Emily also shares the exuberant naivete that Charlie has displayed thus far as well, to the point of making Emily one of the most unlikable characters by far, somehow being neck and neck with Adam of all people. I should also mention that the comparisons to Emily and Charlie are so razor thin to the point that not only do they share the same look and mannerisms, but that they sound the same to each other, as I previously joked that she looked like a reskin of Charlie. And this may be more deliberate than as most would see as lazy, as we will also discover soon. Since the Seraphim gave Charlie and Vaggie their blessing, in comes the first musical violating my eardrums. Welcome to heaven. This is by far the most forgettable of the musicals that we've thus heard, whether that's to do with the really obnoxious glitzy pops mixed with church organs, the way that yet again this musical is thrown at us like audio whiplash, or that there was no reason for this to be a musical in the first place, as it's merely an advertisement for the perks of being in heaven. The only narrative reason for this to be here now of all things is to soften the blow of the true evil that this show decides heaven must be, that we'll find out soon, or to put in stark contrast to how heaven sells itself as idealistic, when in actuality it is anything but. As Charlie and Vaggie are quickly off to make themselves at home, they pass by Adam and Lute, unbeknownst to them. Yay! I had almost washed the taste out of my mouth about Adam being a thing in this show. I'm glad that I'll have to metaphorically clean my insides of him with bleach now. Anyhow, as being the clowns that they are, the two are upset that Charlie and Vaggie are here. What they briefly establish through their suggestions of going after them is that the purges are a secret that the exorcists must keep to themselves as mandated by the Seraphim. So, let's discuss how damaging this revelation is to the nature of these purges, as well as to heaven by extension. So, remember how I said in episode 3 that the sheer manpower needed to go about these purges would be in the tens of millions? How in the fuck could the Seraphim ever hope that the exorcists, much less fucking Adam, keep this a secret with as many that have to partake in it? Adam has been characterized as a douche bro with the bravado of a goddamn silverback gorilla. Does Sarah really expect him to stay quiet about how many sinners he's killed for as long as he's lived? As for the Seraphim themselves, the fact that the Seraphim are keeping this a secret means that they know what they're doing would be opposed by the rest of the denizens of heaven, regardless of the concern of power burgeoning in hell, a power of which we have still yet to establish could even become a direct threat to heaven, mind you. So, this ultimately means that the Seraphim are going about this wanton act of indiscriminate destruction, knowing that it would not be approved, based on a goddamn hunch, and I'm supposed to believe that these deitic beings are smart enough to rationalize for a ear-splitting second the idea of repenting? Oh, and don't worry, this lampshading of heaven's stupid villainy will only get worse as we go on. I should also mention that the design choice for Lute not to wear her mask, despite Adam having his on, a bit muddling. I naturally assume that the way the exorcists look was how they actually are, and not that it's used as a veil not unlike a executioner. The problem with this logic, of course, is that if heaven believes that the sinners can't be redeemed, means it wouldn't be useful for angels to hide their faces to do their deeds, as they wouldn't come across these sinners in the afterlife. As for why Adam chooses to wear his mask always, also apparently he can just drink and eat through it too, I can only speculate that he loves killing sinners so much that the mask bears a likeness to that thrill of his, as cartoonishly evil as that thought is. Sarah jumps to two of them to scold them for their silly ways, although I can't really blame them when the entirety of heaven is the goddamn circus, so that Luke can ask Sarah what Charlie and Vaggie are doing here. What extra details we get is that apparently Adam was the one who came up with the idea of purges, and that Sarah acquiesced, if only believing that would stymie the unrest partaking in hell. Why in the Seraphim damned fuck did Sarah think this would when she hadn't any proof of hell trying to bring down heaven any other time before, unfortunately makes Sarah one of the dumbest fucking characters in this show. At least, for now. But yes, despite Charlie having claimed that Lucifer allowed the purges to happen, and that the monologue stated that the angels were the ones who championed the purges to happen, we now get a third contradictory bit of information as to the origin of these purges. Although, with Adam being characterized as he is, this actually would make sense given his homicidal tendencies, but conversely, I really fucking hate how this show can't decide on what it wants to be its major reveal for something as pivotal as the nature of these purges. Charlie is taken in by the blinding lights of heaven, while Vaggie is not the least bit amused, wanting nothing but to sulk in their room. This allots Adam and Lute to barge in, and in we discover that Vaggie was, dun dun dun, an exorcist herself. Before we can talk about the many ways in this seriously damages the story that only Adam and Lute knew of her past deeds, we gotta talk about the backstory of Vaggie while she was in exorcist mode. So, Adam first states that he named her Vaggie after a vagina, because, you know, douche bro with barely disguised misogyny would do so on her performance as a exorcist. In the flashback, Vaggie inexplicably takes her mask off, as though just to wave to the audience that exorcist is indeed Vaggie, because how the fuck else would you without her doing that for no discernible reason? Adam mentions that Vaggie screwed up by taking slight pity on a random child before getting herself seriously wounded by another exorcist for this defiance, presumably said exorcist being Lute. Gravely wounded, Vaggie crawls to some dank alleyway before being discovered and resuscitated by Charlie, which effectively ends the flashback, and now we can discuss all the problems with this reveal and the flashback. So, even before this show came out, a lot of fans had already speculated that Vaggie might have been an exorcist, as the similarities with her X'd eye and the spear she wields are uncanny, but that likely the show would account for this by recognizing that in spite of Vaggie having taken part in The Exorcist herself, is now doing her part to stop them happening. Because this fucking show doesn't, however, means there is a huge contrivance for everyone who doesn't seem to recognize those similarities, especially that of Charlie, or better yet, Lucifer, who must have known that Vaggie was an exorcist by the way he incorrectly calls her Maggie, presumably out of respect of her knowing where she got that name, and apparently didn't feel of import to let Charlie know that she was boinking an exorcist at any point. And given that, at the time of Lucifer having met Vaggie, that he wasn't on board with Charlie's plan of redemption, you would think he would mention that as a way to dissuade her from doing so. Would he not? Unless I'm reading way too much into Lucifer calling her Maggie simply as a mistake, that still doesn't account for the numerous other ways that Vaggie would have had to keep her past in check. So, you know that little spear she constantly threatens everyone with? If she ever once to use it on somebody, would have immediately given the game away that she is an exorcist, seeing as these are the methods of which sinners are permanently purged. And apparently, not once did any of the people she threatened with spear point out notice the odd similarities with it and the spears the exorcists used too. Or better yet, the
incredible luck
of Vaggie not only having not chased after Charlie to the initial meeting back in episode 1, but that Charlie herself didn't feel to have Vaggie tag along to said meeting, or that Adam and Lute didn't feel compelled to mention this to Charlie when they first met her, despite apparently knowing that she was in a relationship with Vaggie for some time. Even worse, let's also examine the nature of this flashback as another contrivance as to how Vaggie's origins were immediately not apparent. So, this episode explicitly establishes that angels bleed yellow in comparison to red. And yet, when Charlie finds Vaggie bleeding out, that not one drop of it was near or on Vaggie for her to find curious? Or the fact that Vaggie's halo, or her getup, seemingly dropped from her passing out from the initial blood loss? Or better yet, the curious trail of blood that Vaggie was clearly leaving behind as she groveled across the alleyway too? Either that Charlie is completely inept at deducing anything, which, hey, quite apropos for her with this show thus far, or there are some serious bullshit happening for this to even happen in the first place. Other problems with the flashback take place, like for one, the fact that Vaggy's name is not just a joke that Angel calls attention to, but that she was seemingly granted it by Adam as a euphemism for said reproductive organ. So, does that mean that exorcists aren't given names prior to being enlisted for this service, and that Adam has to name all the exorcists that come into his ranks? Because I seriously hate the idea that her name sounding like something crude is indeed alluding to that crudeness, just to have some poetic irony to it all. Second of shitville with this flashback is what I already complained about with Vaggy taking off her mask for no reason. If I am to assume that the purpose of the mask is to hide who is doing the killing as to not create a bias against said executor, then Vaggy doing this while being completely on board with the purges is completely nonsensical. Thirdly, the manner in which Lute takes Vaggy out of the picture. If Lute found Vaggy's insolence so abhorrent that she was willing to cut out her eye and wings, why not kill her too? What use is Vaggy being here unless somehow Lute knew that the demons would finish her off, which will come at a cross once we establish what angels are weak to in episode 7. Furthermore, given that Adam and Lute made it a big deal that an exorcist was killed in their last purge, wouldn't the absence of their best exorcist at that time raise questions from Sarah, the one who's doing these purges because of the veiled threat that hell poses to heaven? Better yet, it's also odd that Sarah herself doesn't seem to recognize Vaggy as a fallen angel at any point in this episode either, despite sharing many similarities with The Exorcist 2. Fourth and last is the decision that Vaggy makes to spare this child. The existence of this demon child poses more questions about the morality of these purges, either that they willingly kill offspring of sinners or offspring of Hellborn, beings of which have not yet had the capability to sin, but the exorcists kill them anyway, making what I already described as indescribably evil more so because of the lack of discrimination as to who they kill, despite apparently having exceptions to Charlie and Lucifer for stupid reasons. Furthermore, why would killing a child be the breaking point of Vaggy to not go through with this, as opposed to being either desensitized or finding the cause stagnant to the pursuit of protecting heaven from hell? What difference does one body make if you're literally stacking them by the thousands at this venture? Who knows? All I know is that despite me going on and on about the stupidity of this reveal, this is still not where the episode, and by extension the show, jumps the shark, if you can believe that. Geez, and we haven't even discussed why Lute and Adam are bringing this up to Vaggy now of all things. Basically, Adam and Lute threaten to spill the beans on Vaggy's dirty little secret to Charlie unless she works against her ideals. Before we find out what Vaggy thinks of this, let's think of the ways in which this tactic would go badly for the two of them. First off, considering that Charlie has been quick to forgive literal strangers for their deceitfulness, that Charlie was quick to let bygones be bygones with her father presumably allowing the exorcisms to happen. This guilt that Adam and Lute are trying to hang over Vaggy's head won't work. Granted, Adam and Lute don't know that's how Charlie operates, but Vaggy does. So for her to even have hesitation to this is astounding. Secondly, given that Vaggy has not once been insincere about making Charlie's dream come true, wouldn't it be more noble that Vaggy, despite having taken part in such a heinous act, is now doing everything she can to prevent it happening had Charlie known? I made it a criticism in my initial impressions that Vaggy could have led in some subtext to Charlie about her true countenance as an angel, not knowing that the show did have some sprinkled in, so kudos to that, but the criticism in regards to that is more so to do with how no one but Adam knew of Vaggy's past. Thirdly, if Adam and Lute were to blurt out that Vaggy was an angel, and that Vaggy had to arrive in heaven the same way that Charlie did, wouldn't that give pause to Sarah why she wasn't accounted for, nor presumably able to go to heaven, to the point that it would almost second-guess Adam's suggestion of the purges being the only viable strategy if Vaggy, being an exorcist at one time, wasn't willing to go through with it? But alas, I'm assuming that Adam and Lute are more than just single-minded clown people, like with Lute's blatant homophobia of Vaggy's relationship and Adam's womanizing view of said relationship. So, I ask again, even if it's a fruitless one, what exactly is moral to Adam in the purview of heaven? He finds hell such a blight to him that he finds the purge is the only way to cleanse it, yet finds what Vaggy and Charlie got going for them attractive, takes part in many an act of debauchery, swears like a sailor, and is overall unpleasant to be around. What is the difference between what Adam does and what he views as sinful in his eyes? This is profoundly why it makes no sense for Adam to be like this, yet we're also supposed to believe that he sees the values of hell as anathema to heaven, when if anything, hell was made for him. Oh, that's right, because he's the main antagonist of the show, and the only way you can make someone an antagonist in this show is to make them a bonkers lunatic with no consistent values or goals in mind. And now we can get into the meeting proper, where whatever flimsy foundation Hazbin Hotel had left completely falls apart. Charlie is displeased to see Adam here of all places, while Adam makes his slimy remarks to her as per usual. Sarah opens the meeting to discuss whether a soul in hell is, or can be, worthy of redemption. She gives the floor to Charlie, but before she can opine, Adam interrupts like the crock of shit that he is. Although I suppose reading dictionary definitions isn't a good starting point for your argument, as Adam is impatiently waiting for some proper evidence of Charlie's proposal. Like in the pilot, Charlie uses angel dust as the springboard of her success with said experiment, prompting Adam to scoff at such a notion. Charlie asks Adam if he knows what it takes for someone to get into heaven, and like a clown, he can't answer the question but has to write up one on the spot. But in spite of this buffoonish behavior that Adam is exhibiting, there may be more merit to why he can't think of any on the spot, because as I fucking said, you can't blame a clown for acting the way they do when they live in the goddamn circus. The notes that Adam sends forth to Charlie's table are as follows: act selfless, don't steal, and stick it to the man. All things that I'm sure that Adam has done the opposite of in heaven, but regardless, Charlie needs to prove that Angel is doing those very things. I should also mention how incongruous it is that stick it to the man is apparently a virtue in heaven, despite that Adam is having this meeting on behalf of the man, but as I said, that's me assuming Adam has any principles. Charlie asserts that Angel is exhibiting those things, and Adam says, bet, and conjures a projection of what Angel is currently occupied with. Also, like in the pilot, they use the same joke that Angel is very much not doing what Charlie says he's doing, making this obvious joke come from a mile away. This also allows the B-plot of what the hostel's staff are getting up to happen, as the Council of Heaven are all spectating this. We get more of Sir Pentious awkwardly trying to hit on Cherry Bomb, while trying to obfuscate his doing of that by getting everybody involved in his shenanigans. Yeah, it's all in good fun until you take that joke just a little too far, don't it? But we'll get to that. Angel continues to complain about what Val's got him doing, prompting Cherry to slip in something special to make his night a bit more palatable. Husk tries to dissuade Angel into doing so on account of his current progress with the hotel. Angel is of two minds about it, but eventually caves into pressure, getting a sly remark from Adam, who's viewing all of this. This gets Charlie to object on account of not only Adam having partaken in a bit of debauchery himself, the fucking dumbass, but that partaking in drinks shouldn't be seen as a sin in the eyes of heaven. Oh, if only she knew. Despite this, Charlie pleads that they just need to see more to understand the values that Angel holds, getting Sarah a bit doubtful, but Emily wants to give Charlie a fighting chance, prompting more of that B-plot. What is especially daunting is that Charlie excitedly proclaims, "Fuck yes!" getting a look of disapproval by Sarah despite Adam constantly swearing throughout this entire council hearing. Yeah, what exactly is heaven morals in regards to language exactly? Wouldn't Sarah hold Adam in much higher regard than a hellborn demon not to swear? But geez, that's just me assuming that heaven has any standards on language. Back to B-plot, the hotel staff get turned up on the drinks to the point that Nifty is dizzy from all of it, prompting Angel to try to corral Nifty from further intoxication. Nifty continues to wander off and gets into the supply closet, Cherry Bomb curious as to why Angel is concerning himself with watching over her over anything else. As though what Angel is doing isn't already on the nose with what Charlie is trying to prove to the council, Angel is just looking out for Nifty's best interests and gets her distracted with playing with Husk like a action figure. Now, while this is done a bit clunkily, and had he done this any sooner while the council weren't paying attention would have undermined Charlie's proposal, I do think this does fall in line with Angel's character that while he's a loser, baby, he doesn't want others to go down that same path. Sir Pentious is absolutely wasted, getting him to once again hit on Cherry Bomb to the point of suggesting they go have sex in one of the private rooms. He can't bring himself to explain why Cherry would have sex with him, getting Sir Pentious to blurt out that he's having sex with everyone. And then, with little reprieve, played out completely like a joke, a bunch of random clubbers take Sir Pentious, clearly intoxicated and against his will, into the room to be snoo-snooed. So yeah, this would have been a funny misunderstanding had not what episode 4 outlined as horrible breathing down this episode's neck. And it's very apparent that whatever praise I could give to the show, episode 6 was going to trample all over it. And yet, this is still not where the show truly jumps the shark, if you can believe that. Because the show really has to ignore that tone-deaf approach to its subject matter, we quickly go back to Angel proving himself virtuous inadvertently by way of noticing Valentino's presence at said club. Angel wants to nope the fuck out of there once he sees him, but Nifty has once again gone astray and going right towards Valentino. Angel catches Nifty, but not soon enough for Val not to notice him, gaining Val piqued to his fleet of fancy. So if the tone deafness of Sir Pentious getting raped in the sex room wasn't already bad enough, this episode also had Val here to remind us of his arrangement with Angel. I'd expect crazy eyes from Mr. Deeds to hit the mark more than this episode does by this point. Anyhow, Val mistakes Nifty as being interested in his wares, and Angel isn't having any of it, cursing him and telling him off on any suggestion of his friends being involved in his shit. Val again reminds Angel of their deal, and Angel throws it back at him, saying that he can say and do whatever he wants outside of the studio. Val throws him aside, telling him that he'll repay Angel's indignity in kind tomorrow. Angel nevertheless is resolute, glad that he stood up to him, yet again a not so subtle through line to the proof of his redemption by what Adam clearly wrote. Through this, Angel suggests that Cherry could crash at the hotel, suggesting that Cherry is either a nomad or just simply homeless, but Cherry isn't interested, finding the life she has perfectly suitable for her. Although she does say that if Angel needs her for something that she'll be more than down, and that narrative Chekhov's gun will just have to be saved for episode 8. Anyhow, she makes a comment about wanting to fuck the next guy she sees, which in return Sir Pentious, who just missed his mark on being that next guy. Yeah, I'm glad this show continues to fiddle fuck with how we're supposed to feel about him being casually gang raped with his desire to fuck Cherry Bomb. It's not like that would be something that Angel Dust would take issue with or something. Anyhow, Charlie uses what Angel just did as proof of meeting the short list of requirements for redemption. Adam is flustered for a response, sputtering that if Angel did meet their demands, then why hasn't he made an appearance in heaven? With Emily and the council also curious as to why. In finally, comes a line that single-handedly destroyed whatever patience, whatever giving benefit of the doubt that I had for this show left.
Wait, none of you know what gets someone into heaven?
And because none of the council members can make a response, and Sarah, through gritted teeth, tries to make a weak justification for it, this ultimately means that Charlie is correct. Heaven has no fucking clue who gets to go into heaven. This is a line on a level of stupidity not seen since the Rise of Skywalker, where apparently the Star Destroyers on Exegol don't know which way is up. I feel this is so stupid that this doesn't need explanation, but you know what? This fucking show doesn't explain anything, so I might as well be the surrogate for it. So, given that Sarah already displayed disgust that Charlie swear, looked toward Adam to come up with his requisites for who gets to go into heaven, and that even in ancillary media, like Helva Boss, makes it a point that an act of manslaughter prohibits you going into heaven, means that no, heaven clearly has a way to tell who gets to go to heaven or not. You can't have a clear line as to who gets to go to hell and never once think that doing the opposite of those things would allot you going to heaven. Unless Sarah is completely bullshitting and just doesn't want sinners to be redeemed no matter how virtuous, means that heaven has been, for thousands of years, just rolling the dice on who is allowed in heaven. I can't express this enough, but if fucking little Nicky is somehow beating you to the punch on what is moral or not moral, you done fucked up. And keep in mind, little Nicky was only using the setting of hell as a comedic backdrop for the movie. This show is using the entirety of hell as a central narrative point, and yet even that can't keep its morality consistent. Let's also keep in mind that, as a result of this serious revelation, that Charlie's entire precept of redemption is completely null and void, which means so much for that interesting premise of trying to redeem the worst of the worst. It just turns out that heaven is evil, guys. What a totally original and not overdone to hell concept. Is it any wonder then that Adam acts the way that he does and barely gets scolded for it? And here, I thought that the show thought it funny to make him an evil dumbass, but no, that is by his very upbringing that he is like this, which means when he says that the rules are black and white, that the show agrees by way of painting heaven this way and giving Adam the impression that it must be so. Except for when the fuck it isn't, like with Valentino, Alistair, Vaggie, Charlie, or many other examples that this show refuses to acknowledge because, with Reddit tier atheism in mind, heaven must be evil because my parents forced me to go to church on Sundays sometimes. But let's elaborate. Why did the show decide to go with this angle? Was it because Vivienne refused to put any hard rules as to what heaven deems sinful, as to not warrant the ire of fans who think that her deciding that homophobia is a sin means that she believes it too? That's actually quite likely, given that for all the talk of this show being edgy, that Vivienne regrets making a Jeffrey Dahmer joke in the pilot, because apparently her dense as nails fan base can't associate depiction with endorsement. Although, while cogent, doesn't square away the fact that Lute finds what Vaggie and Charlie have going for each other blasphemous, something she would only believe if heaven has deemed homosexuality a sin. So yeah, that 4chan meme may very well be in fact more accurate than we once realized. The second possibility is that the show writers sincerely and utterly believe heaven contempt in all manner, and exacerbated this by having their yearly purges indiscriminate and secret, while knowing full well that they could be killing those who could be redeemed. This is the most likely case, as Sarah seems flustered by her house of cards falling apart at the seams here, as well as a particular image of her in the second musical that will equally infuriate me, but for different reasons to vindicate that. The only issue with this that I can see is that it seems the other denizens of heaven aren't aware of the purges, nor the fast and loose nature of these rules, both of which deliberated by Sarah and Adam for extremely stupid and thinly veiled reasons. Regardless if the show is painting the entirety of heaven as evil, they still are confidently stating that the foundation heaven built its fundamentals on is built on a lie. And the third, and my personal reason for this, is that the people who write this show are fucking dumb. Occam's razor and foot and mouth, the writers had no clue what they were implying when Charlie stated this, nor ever considered the other things they clearly established as being sinful, while also admonishing the very sinners like Valentino who likely can't be redeemed based on their behavior. They wanted a hook for this episode, and by golly, they got it in the most destructive way possible, to the duress of everything else this show tried to build its own foundation upon. But whatever conclusion you make of this, any of these reasons are equally dumb for the show to establish. Now, from all my complaining, a lot of people will come to the conclusion that I would rather not have him be painted in any antagonistic light. They would be wrong, because what I take issue with is the way the show decided to make heaven antagonistic. They could have meaningfully explored, or better yet, challenge Charlie's ideals of what redemption is to her, and conversely, the ideals of what heaven finds moral or not. But the utter refusal to acknowledge any groundwork as to what heaven finds moral or not means that it's a foregone conclusion if Charlie is successful or not. So even if any of the people she tries to redeem do get redeemed, it means jack shit because the entire process is either unknown or just completely random. It may be even worse if Adam only got his place in heaven simply by being the first mortal man on earth and not by the virtues he upholds, further pinging the stupid villainy of heaven while adding selective bias as part of their redemption process. Lastly, before we get into the musical, I should mention that everyone is evaluating the degree of redemption based on Adam's hastily written requirements for it. If Sarah genuinely knows the means of which one would allot one to go to heaven or hell, you would think she would ever once pipe up that Adam's own morals don't align with heaven's. But the fact that she doesn't, nor do any of the other council members question his logic apart from, he's the first mortal man of heaven, means that Adam may very well be the first person in heaven to ever once inscribe these in scripture. Now, can you fucking imagine that? This utter clown fuck retard of a cretin was able to do in a few seconds that the Seraphim, and by extension heaven, couldn't in the thousands and thousands of years of their existence. Make a baseline for what gets you a pass into heaven. How utterly tragic that Adam of all inadvertently paved the way for this to even be considered, much less outlined. And I think that fundamentally puts into stark detail just how dire this show has become now. Emily opens in the song, "You didn't know," which, like with the rest of this episode, finds new ways to infuriate me. It has all the usual problems I have with musicals, and not only with the self-insistence that Hell's Greatest Dad had, but also this extremely self-righteous, presumptuous middle finger poised at heaven, as though the heaven they wrote as evil wasn't enough for them to get their licks in. Whether that be with Lute and Adam throwing in a slight reprise to Hell is Forever, which gets Adam to accidentally blurt out that they've been conducting these purges in secret to Emily having this completely warped view that the people Adam slays in hell are all innocent. Oh, and won't we get to that too? Or how Sarah tries to justify herself with a complete non-explanation while the fire in the background are reflected ominously in her pupils. Before we delve into the equally infuriating duet that Emily and Charlie have, let's discuss all this. So, given what I said before, how is it only now that Emily, and by extension the council, discovered the purges were a thing? Even worse than that, Lute puts on the mask in the musical to illustrate that point, which makes me wonder how no one suspected a thing if Lute was keen on wearing her work clothes so casually. Secondly, Charlie confronts Sarah on her refusal to acknowledge any of this, with Sarah giving it a weak response of, "There are many things you don't know." Yeah, and wouldn't we love to know those things, huh? Because I get right clarified when somebody explains to me by treating me like a fucking idiot. Thirdly, whether Emily believes that what Adam is doing here is wrong, surely she would know that some of those sinners do deserve death, right? Surely, in spite of looking like a child, that she doesn't act like one. Oh wait, she's a splitting image to Charlie. Of course she does, because Charlie might as well be. So, with these two being two peas in a putrid poisonous pod, they postulate on the projector podium how perilous the pearly gates must be if hell is permanent.
If hell is forever, then heaven must be a lie. Emily. If angels can do whatever and remain in the sky, the rules are shades of gray when you don't do as you say, when you make the wretched suffer just to kill them again.
Using the melody from Hell is Forever against Lute and Adam, Emily and Charlie decree, with no exaggeration, that heaven is complete bullshit. All this, with no irony, comes across to me as someone who grew up in a Christian household with contempt for it and couldn't grow out of it, and found solace in this show to display said contempt in this manner. This isn't Emily and Charlie saying this as far as I'm concerned. This is the writers saying this on behalf of the heaven they wrote and they believe must function this way. Because the only way that Emily and Charlie could come to this conclusion is because of how vague the rules of heaven are, done out of incompetence, malice, or fear by the writers, and that Sarah chose to convene this meeting in spite of knowing full well there were no hard rules set in motion of who deserves to go to heaven or not. This is hardly the victory the writers think it is for them, because they had to severely handicap the competition to come to this result. Coming off as extremely petty, they had to stoop so low. The final stretch of this ass cancer of a song is that Charlie is exhilarated that as a result of this discussion that she has a council in turmoil with one another, before Adam and Luke proclaim that she shouldn't get on her high horse given the circumstances. And those circumstances are that they revealed to Charlie that Vaggie was an exorcist like them, getting Charlie to collapse in dismay. Welp, so much for trying to be remotely consistent with Charlie's character. It's almost like Charlie is simply flipping a switch to whatever is happening around her. I should also mention that it's weird how Charlie was happy that the council was at each other's throats despite needing their unambiguous approval of her plan. But seen as the heaven bad, hell good part of this show has finally shown its hand, they're going to run with it with every chance they get. Sarah resolves herself and deems that there is no evidence for sinners to be redeemed in spite of it all, getting Adam to cheer gleefully and state that when the time comes, he'll be hitting the hotel first. Yeah, we can talk about how planning a specific time and date to do these purchases is stupid once we get into episode 7, but for the immediate, how would attacking the hotel be logistically sound for the exorcists, considering at most they could kill like 7 or so people? Also, what about Charlie's pardon? Is that not in the cards anymore, or does Adam simply want to destroy the hotel on top of the patrons? Oh, silly me, I was thinking Adam had even thought of any of this and not that he just wanted to be a dick. Well, we have just a few minutes left, and yet this episode still manages to find more ways to piss me off. So, Emily up to this point has been quite infuriating given the circumstances, but she manages to be just as head up her ass as Adam is by saying this.
How can I bring joy when I now know we are bringing misery to thousands of innocent people?
So when Emily said that she wasn't a child to be coddled by Sarah, I guess she's fucking wrong, because how in the fuck can you have this perspective knowing that Valentino exists without having the mind of a child? And she does know him because everyone was watching what Angel Dust was getting into, including, but not limited to, sticking up to Valentino. Now granted, she's saying this to Sarah, a dipshit herself who's only doing this to save her people from a uprising in hell, an uprising of which we never see nor is ever once meagerly expressed other than when Velvet and the overlords discover the dead exorcist and suggests fighting back against them. Should I also mention that given that Sarah doesn't have a goddamn clue if the people she's trying to save are sinners themselves because the morals of heaven aren't written in stone? Yeah, kind of a worthless appeal there, you fucking dipshit, but God knows that Emily is equally as dumb for believing that all the sinners must be innocent too. And that, finally, was the end of episode 6, and I have to say, I'm impressed. Not in the quality of this episode, mind you, but how quickly, efficiently, and spectacularly this episode destroys any semblance of plot, world building, characters, or lack thereof for this show. It takes a certain kind of stupid to accomplish this, to the point that I have to wonder if this was a sabotage of the fundamentals this show was foreshadowing back in episode 1, or that the writers were merely delaying the inevitable corner they put themselves in. It was at this point that I knew I couldn't let this show go quietly into that good night in spite of my initial feelings, because holy hell was I flabbergasted at the sudden steep drop in quality this episode takes in relation to the rest of them. Even with as long-winded as I've gone on to this episode, can it really elaborate on just the frankly infinitesimal ways this show falls apart from how this episode delivers its plot forward, and will forever muddy the remaining episodes going forward. But surely it can't get worse than this, can it?